Five, four, three, two. Shalom. Hello. I'm checking. Hello, hello, hello. Go. So the illusion of Hebraic restoration, right? So why Messianic Judaism needs to become Red Judaism, right? The history of Jewish existence in the Western Hemisphere did not begin in the air-conditioned sanctuaries of modern suburban megachurches, right? Nor was birth in the 20th century Protestant mission boards. Its American roots were forged by crypto Jews, right? The Anusim, who preserved their confidential identity under the shadow of the Iberian Inquisition, maintaining their Hebraic heritage through centuries of secrecy, exile, sacrifice. Centuries later, right, it was a pioneering institutions of Reform Judaism that fought to establish Judaism as a recognized, protected, and respected historical faith tradition within the sociological and legal fabrics within the United States. So, mind you, you can have Jesus, we can have Jesus under Judaism. An example would be the Subotniks and the Crimean Karaites, right? So I'll get to it. Right? Against this rich, precarious history of survival and institutional struggle stands the contemporary movements known as Messianic Judaism, right? Which its current iteration started in the 1960s. While presenting itself as an indigenous restoration of the first century Hebraic faith, right? Its, its institutional machinery, its financial institution, and core theological architecture remain overwhelmingly derivative of the 20th century American evangelicalism. In exchange in the historical realities of Jewish survival for the patronage of Gentile parachurch organizations, the movement has reduced sacred Hebraic rites to mere illustrative props for Protestant eschatology, right? So basically, the coming back of the Messiah, the gathering of 12 tribes, is taken into a larger, bigger movement, right? So institutions like the Messianic Jewish Alliance, the United Messianic UMJC, is basically you need to divorce the evangelical institutions, right? So modern Messianic Judaism's deep entanglement with evangelical Christianity and with modern evangelical Christianity undermines its claim to authentic Hebraic restoration, replacing genuine historical continuity with a Protestant subculture wrapped in Hebraic terminology. To forge a legitimate identity within the American religious landscape, the movement must dismantle its dependency on evangelical institutions and realign itself with historic Jewish realities, honoring the civic and legal foundations built by Reform Judaism in the Americas, and seeking Qahal-Edah integrity by engaging with, hear me out, orthodox rabbinic frameworks through the recognized status of B'nai Noas or Noahides, right? So, a little bit of the history on how Messianic Judaism actually was organized. And I got this a little bit from Zoe Jacoby. She may disagree vehemently with what I'm going to say, right? But I'm still a student of, or was a student, unfortunately, may not have been the best student of a Chachamim. And this Chachamim was the student of the current Nasi of the Nathan Sanhedrin. So I'm no one, but it helps understand where I'm coming from. So the popular narrative framing Messianic Judaism as an organic indigenous movement of Jewish believers who discovering lost roots collapses under historical scrutiny, right? The movement and institutional foundations of the were established not by self-sustaining Jewish communities, but by 19th and 19th and 20th century Protestant mission boards. organizations like the London Society promoting Christianity amongst the Jews, the American Boards of Mission to the Jews, now Chosen People Ministries, and the Southern Baptist Convention's Home Mission Boards built for initial infrastructure of Hebrew Christianity. Following the Jesus movement of the late 1960s and 70s, deliberate tactical shifts occurred, recognizing that traditional assimilationist conversion tactics yielded minimal success. Mission strategies adopted contextualization, right? A missiological method designed to address Protestant conversions and Jewish cultural forms. What was marketed as an indigenous Hebraic revival was, in truth, an engineered strategy funded by Gentile parachurch entities to maximize evangelization or proselytizing targets within Jewish populations. So there's that. So no more we need to become financially dependent. So this doesn't also apply to Messianic Jews. It also applies to Hebrew roots movements that are highly intertwined with Messianic Jews. This institutional history created with a relationship of deep financial dependence. So majority of Messianic congregations, television networks, education programs, and humanitarian outreaches initially relies directly on financial or just of white American evangelical donors and non-Jewish Christian Zionist organizations. So capital inflow, right? Its current mechanism is funded by current churches. Its impact on the movement, it dictates financial sustainability and the growth of the trajectory. So whatever money is going in, right, it changes how these messianic Ganesa are gonna preach, right? Institutional reliance, right? There's congregational budgets, media networks, and mission operations, right? What this does, right, it creates a structural veto for external churches. So King's College can dictate this is what I want to teach for your messianic Jewish students, right? It's dogmatic alignment. Its adherence to dispens, dispensationalism and American religious right politics, right? Because if you know something about American Jews, they tend to be highly, all over the board, but it skews a lot with conservatism when this is not how Torah taught us, right? Torah teaches us love thy neighbor. Torah teaches us, right, to be highly communal. And the Messianic Jewish group movement is that, but because of politics, right? It prevents adoption of stances that alienate evangelical bases, right? You aren't an evangelical Christian, right? Make sure there isn't unity, right? There's an a authentic stamp of approval. So also, but beyond that, right? Beyond that, there's a theological importation from Protestant churches, right? So this isn't a very strong one, right? But penal substitutionary atonement is the movement, right? Basically, it ignores teshuvah, right, and puts only sola fide, right, faith alone, right. When we have these traditions, right, sola fide was tradition, right. These traditions, right. So when Yeshua goes into the temple, he teaches us, okay, cleanse yourself before you go. This isn't the biggest issue, right? It's a very small issue, but it could become bigger. The bigger issue is dispensational eschatology, right? So it includes the rapture, the rebuilding of the third temple to trigger the end times for Armageddon, These concepts reduce the state of Israel and the Jewish people to stage props, right, for end time fantasies. So, no, this war in Gaza shouldn't be happening. This war in the West Bank and Golan Heights and Lebanon, and the fact that Syria has a former leader with ties with ISIS shouldn't have existed, right? What it also does, right? Being entangled with evangelical Christianity, it reduces, highly reduces halakha, right? Jewish law with conventional standard evangelical frameworks, right? Halakha strips out of its binding status. Jewish rites such as Shabbat, candle lighting, blowing the shofar, and wearing talit are just, decorations. They don't have any meaning and just highly emphasize the doctrine. You know exactly that the shofar has high meaning, right? So, because I'll make this about the Americas in the United States, I'm gonna go back into the historical legitimacy that we have, right? If I were in Europe, I would have used the Shombotask of Hungary and the Subodniks, which the Subodniks still exist, and the Crimean Karaites and the Karaim, which means Karaite like, right? So, and in fact, right? So, long before American Protestantism conceived its roots of Hebrew Christian missions, right? Hebraic life already existed in the earliest bearers of the Anosim. The crypto Jews who carried the light of the Torah in secret across the Eastern Caribbean and the frontiers of New Mexico. And today, right, most of that would be various Latin American countries, plus the southwestern United States from Texas to California, all the way to Oregon, Washington, parts of Wyoming, right? So strip of formal synagogues and communal infrastructure, right? Yiddishkeit or Judaism maintained its conventional fidelity through private memory at immense personal risk. And the survival wasn't wrought by these evangelical churches, right? Well, it did slowly die down, right? Because of the Mexican Inquisition and the Spanish Inquisition, right? The crypto Jews sacrificed their social status to preserve their essence of big identity of their hostile regimes. Modern Messianic movement has surrendered its theological independence to be comfortable with American conservative Protestantism, right? So to reform the whole thing, right? Figures like Isaac Mayer Weiss spearheaded the effort to establish Judaism as a permanent, respected, and legally recognized pillar of American religious life through the creation of the Union American Hebrew Congregations and Hebrew Union College. That the Reform movement constructed the legal, educational, and social bedrock that guarantees religious liberty for all expressions of Hebraic heritage in the Western Hemisphere. So, modern Messianic congregations directly benefit from the civil protections and public legitimacy and constitutional precedents forged by these early reform leaders. For those of y'all that have ties with Reform Judaism and are officially like tied with Reform Judaism, right? Many of us that have that Tenok Nishbal or like crypto Jewish don't really do, or even those that are conservative or modern Orthodox, right? But here's one thing that we need to do, right? Solidarity over dogmatic uniformity, right? So whatever these people want to say, what do you have to worry about is the next thing, right? We need to have historical honesty, institutional independence, public solidarity, right? So historical honesty, right? We need to establish the Jewish legitimacy in the Americas, replacing the missionizing narratives within civic struggle, right? So, bye bye certain churches that are funding and embedded with APAC, institutional independence, right? Just what it goes with the historical honesty, public solidarity, right? Establish a unified stance against external threats and harden your stance in Hebraic identity, right? Now, this is the most important part. If you didn't pay attention of anything that I said earlier, and if you're one of those teachers or so-called rabbis within a Messianic congregation or a Hebrew roots congregation, this is the most important part that I'm going to say, right? Find halakhic integrity and strategic engagement with the B'nai Noah framework and the Orthodox recognition. I'm not saying lose your so-called Messianic Judaism congregation. It's more like, hey, can we get recognized as B'nai Noah, right? So there's a dilemma of hybrid identity and masking, right? So you're within Jewish frameworks, right? Traditional, it gets called LARPing, right? Or pretending to be when you not are. But here's the thing, right? The structural flow of modern Messianic Judaism licensed it's an attempt to construct an illegitimate middle space, asserting self-defined Jewish authority while operating outside the legal boundaries of traditional halakha by adopting rabbinic titles, wearing talit, and utilizing Hebrew nomenclature. The movement engages in this satirical masking, right? It's a satire to some people, to rabbinic authorities across all major stream. This hybrid identity is viewed as an erasure of legal boundaries that claims that Jewish conventional status, while a certain core Protestant dogmas, is incompatible with strict Hebraicism, right? So, a valid right to. So, most of this is already codified in the Talmud in Sanhedrin 56a, and the Noahide framework pursues the seven universal ethical spiritual laws, right? So, Avodah Zarah, Birkat Hashem, Shefichat Damim, Gezel, Gilu Yarayot, Ever Min Chachei, and Dinim, right? All these seven basic laws. And like I said, if you want to have Jesus again, right? Shabbat 116, 810 has this little conversation called the Be'amidan and the Chazon Isfrei. And they're saving the Evangelion, so the corrupt folio, basically the good news. It's a big pun in two languages. So stop with the messianic evangelical hybridity, right? And accept the honest of this Noahide status, right? But I'm not saying to lose everything. It's more, hey, it's easier to call yourself a Noahide than it is to call yourself a Jew. Until here's a big secret, right? That I'll tell ya. There's a lot of Orthodox, a lot of Reform, and a lot of conservatives that look Jesus as a personal Messiah, right? You, they can't do anything. They just keep their mouth shut because, like I said, well, I haven't said this. The name Yeshua is treated very important. There's a whole conversation between the name Yeshua and Yeshayahu and what does it mean. It's a big important thing. I won't expand on it, but it's an important conversation to look up that is found within rabbinical circles, right? So, a conclusion for the whole thing that I said, right? So, by bullet points, right? Sever institutional dependencies, embrace historic civic solidarity, and submit to halakhic honesty, and become messianic, a messianic Hebrew Noahide, right? So it's a little confusing if you think about it, but that's it.